of the best ways to upgrade your smart home is by adding Z-Wave, and the Zooz ZST39 is a great option to do that. This Z-Wave controller can be added to any device that has a USB port, such as a Home Assistant Yellow or a Raspberry Pi. It comes with Z-Wave on board with an 800 series chip. It includes Z-Wave Long Range along with S2 Security and Smart Start. I have a Raspberry Pi 4 here. Just like any other USB device, you can plug this right in and you're good to go. I'd recommend plugging it into a USB 2 port, that way you don't take up one of the USB 3 ports. If you got a case, make sure that your case doesn't block any of the USB ports, so just plug it in and then the power and networking and you're good to go. If you need a tutorial on how to install Home Assistant for your Raspberry Pi, I have a demo in my previous video on the Home Assistant Yellow. It's virtually the same, except you'll install to your SD card instead of to an NVMe SSD. I'll link it in the description and you can check that out. Okay, so after getting Home Assistant up and running with the videos that I linked to you earlier, now we need to set up Z-Wave.js for our Z-Wave stick. First thing we're going to do, however, is check to make sure that the hardware is recognized by Home Assistant. So if we go down here to Settings and System, and then we go to Hardware, this is a Raspberry Pi 4. Like I've mentioned, you can click the All Hardware button here, and you should see a TTY ACM0, and it should say Z-Wave Zooz Stick 800 blah blah blah. That means that Home Assistant can recognize it. Okay, so now that you see it in your hardware settings, we're going to install Z-Wave.js UI. But basically what you'll do is you'll go over to Settings, then you'll go over to Add-ons, and you'll go down here to Add-on Store. You'll then search for Z-Wave.js UI, and then you'll click this one. You'll then click Install. After a few moments, it will install and give you some options here. You can pretty much enable all of these. So click all that and then click Start. Let's go over here to Z-Wave.js and click this button. If you want to share statistics with the project, click OK, but I'll click No here. Same thing with the change logs. If you like seeing what's going on the technical level, you can read all this every time, but that's kind of annoying in my opinion, so I disable them and then click OK. So we need to go into the settings real quick and change a few things before we can use our Z-Wave stick. You can ignore everything in the UI or general. You can change them if you want. I don't really use them, so we can skip. You might want to enable backups to make sure that your Z-Wave network has a history in case something goes wrong. So I'm going to enable this, and we'll just keep it at the default. So every day at midnight. We can also back up the Z-Wave controller. Enabling this will back up the controller's NVM or non-volatile memory. That's things like the network IDs, the individual device configurations, any firmware or other associated information like how devices are linked together. Generally, it's important information, so make sure you back that up too. So I have the store backup enabled and then the NVM backup enabled. So close that one. We'll open up the Z-Wave box. Right here, you'll choose the serial port that we saw in the hardware listing. You can click that one if it shows up. Otherwise, you can do ACM0, and you can leave this alone. These are the security keys for all of the Z-Wave devices. The controller will use these to communicate with all of your devices. Have it auto-generate some for us, and we'll just click all 6 of them there. There's separate ones for the long-range Z-Wave, and then more keys for just regular Z-Wave. So click those. You can leave the rest alone. None of these will need to be changed. So there's one more thing. We'll close that. We'll go down here to Home Assistant. We'll make sure WS Server is enabled and that the server port is 3000. When this DNS discovery box is checked, Home Assistant will recognize that you have Z-Wave.js locally. That will click Save and go back over here to the main Z-Wave.js page. You should see this dropdown for your controller right here. If this doesn't show up, try rebooting Home Assistant and then coming back in here and seeing if it shows up. After choosing it in the settings, you should see it listed here. The 800 series firmware, as it's mentioning here, has some bugs if your version's 4.7.2.2.1, which mine is by a few, mine's 7.19.3. So let's download the latest firmware for the ZST39. So we can just go over to Zooz. They have an over-the-air firmware update file section. In here, you can download all the firmware files for basically all of their devices. If we search for ZST39, We go down here. Now here we have kind of a conflict. Over here in Z-Wave.js, it says 800 series firmware has issues, which it definitely has if you're on SDK version earlier than this. But we go over here to the Zooz site, and for our Z-Wave stick, it basically says issues have been reported with something higher than 719 around a controller locking up and needing to be rebooted in certain edge cases. It probably doesn't happen that often, but there's probably a few people out there who have had it. And so Zooz recommends not to update your Z-Stick firmware unless you specifically have been having issues with yours. So if yours has been freezing and you keep having to reboot to get it to work, then you should update the firmware. Otherwise, Zooz says don't update if it's working just fine. So I'm going to listen to the manufacturer here, but if you do run into any issues like that, then the firmware would be here. So you would download it from here and extract the zip. We won't actually do it, but I'll show you how to do it in case you are one of these edge cases that's having issues. So you download this zip, and in that zip, there is a GBL file, which I'll show over here. Let's see, let's make sure that we extract this. In here, there's a GBL file. Basically, you would go back over here to Z-Wave.js. You would go to the, we'd go to Advanced, and you click Firmware Update. You go over here, you go to wherever you downloaded the firmware, and you would double click this. And then once it's in here, you then click Update. I'm not going to click it, but if you were running into those firmware issues, this would be where you upgrade the firmware. If I do run into issues, I'll post a comment or something, but I've been using this stick for, gosh, like 2 or 3 years at this point, and I've had no issues. I just factory reset it so that I could show you how to use it. So let's go ahead and add a device so you can see what it looks like. So to add a device to your Z-Wave controller, go ahead and get your device, and we're going to go over here to the little hamburger menu, and we're going to click Manage Nodes. It'll bring up this box, so make sure you check inclusion, and we'll give it a name here. We'll say guest bedroom door. You can leave the location blank. This will only be stored in Z-Wave.js. It won't be stored in Home Assistant, which is where I usually manage all my devices. So go ahead and leave that blank. We'll click Next. If your device has security, which I would highly recommend, I would check this box. I usually just keep it as default. That way, if the device has security, it'll be added with security. If it doesn't, then it'll just add it without it. So you can leave default as checked. Click Next. Inclusion mode is started. Now I have a door sensor here. I'm just gonna triple click a little button on the back for this device. Your device will have something different maybe, so make sure you check your manufacturer's documentation for how to include or add devices to a network. So I'm going to triple tap the back of my device, and it added the door sensor. This door sensor doesn't have any security apparently, so it just said nothing, but if yours does, it will mention what security method it was added with. So just a heads up. Okay, so let's close that box, and you can see it added here with the manufacturer, the product, and then code, and then the name that we gave it earlier, along with various other settings for whether it's Z-Wave long range, whether it's awake or not, what version it is, and so on. You can always go down here and expand this if you needed to change its name, or if you wanted to change some of the device's specific configuration. I'm leaving all of this alone. Most of the defaults are pretty much good enough for me. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's add this to Home Assistant. Let's add our Z-Wave controller and devices to Home Assistant. So we go down here to Settings, and we go up here to Devices and Services. Click on that. We should see something for Z-Wave right up here. Click Add, click Submit. So when this shows up, that means that Z-Wave and Home Assistant are communicating with each other. So we can choose an area if you want. This is where you'd say the door sensor is in the bedroom, and this one is in the bedroom too, or the living room, or wherever you end up having all these devices. And you can add more later as you need to, but we'll just click Finish. And we go down here to Z-Wave.js, click on that, and we click on Devices, and it lists both of them here in Home Assistant. If you want to see like the actual entities of the door sensor, you can go and browse them here. For example, we can go to guest bedroom door, and then the window or door is open. And so as I open and close the door sensor, you'll see the state change. So there I just opened it and you'll see it was open, and then I'm closing the door sensor again, and you can see that it's closed. And you can do this a bunch of times to see that it works. And you see I'm just kind of going crazy here. So you know it works. Good job on Z-Wave.js UI for being really fast. I think the Zooz ZST39 is a pretty good deal for what you get. It works with virtually any system that supports USB devices, and it's reasonably priced compared to its competitors. It was easy to add to Home Assistant, and when we added a device to it, it was quick to send those events to Home Assistant, as we saw earlier. If you're looking for more Z-Wave videos for both product reviews and explainers, I've got a playlist here that I'll put over here in the card, and I'll see you over there.